I'm Frank Vaughn. It's Sunday, March 16th, 2025, and not a day goes by that somebody doesn't say to me, Frank, please re-upload the debate content, or Frank, please re-upload the documentary you did in Ottawa. I've been working on this for a while, and I was up at 5:30 this morning drinking my coffee, and I thought, today is the day I'm going to finish it, and I'm going to be lucky if I get it online at 2 o'clock. This is going to be mostly debate stuff, different clips. There might be some stuff at the end that no one's ever seen. I'm not sure if I'm going to include it yet. But without further ado, this first clip is the final closing statement in a debate, the last debate that was held in 2019. Sorry about the music. I don't have it clean. I just have the musical edit. Applause was banned. The incumbent was Kim Rudd. She was beat by Philip Lawrence. A lot of people in the community credited me with actually beating her, but they didn't vote for me. They voted for Phil. He still sits in the House of Commons to this day. And even though applause was banned, the MC couldn't stop the audience for the closing statement. Without further ado, let's begin. We have heard all this before. The spending promises, the platitudes, the virtue signaling, the sloganeering, and absolutely nothing changes. I'm here because it was Mulrooney who started the fire sale continued the fire sale of the majority of Canada's gold reserves while speeding up the massive accumulation of national debt that were started under Pierre Elliott Trudeau. I did it because it was Chrétien and Martin who began the carving up of this nation, selling it to international interests without regard for the future generations of Canadians. I did it because it was Stephen Harper who continued to overspend, who continued the fire sale of our national property and wealth to China, Saudi Arabia, and others. It was he who bent the knee to the United Nations by signing us onto Agenda 2030 as one of his final acts as Prime Minister, and it was he who allowed the crushing of our charter rights in High River. I did it because it was Justin Trudeau who gave us the Paris Climate Treaty and the Global Compact on migrations, both of which further erode our national sovereignty and give it away to New York. I did it because it was Trudeau's touchy-feely ways that spawned the scandal called Gropergate, which revealed the superficial feminism of his party. And I did it because after 4 years of calling everyone who disagreed with him racist, he got caught in blackface how many times? I did it because Andrew Scheer promises to keep most of Trudeau's policies intact, from immigration to carbon pricing. They play a game of rhetoric, vying for victory in a vain horse race where the racetrack is set and the results and the outcome are the same. And so I ask you, where's the representation for people who want an actual choice? And the answer we're trying to build is the PPC. In 1 year, we've come a long way. We have 320 candidates all across this country. We come from every ethnic background, race, color, and creed, and we're united around a set of principles that are drafted on freedom, fairness, personal responsibility, and respect. Smaller government, limited government, spending your money responsibly, and actually offering a concrete choice to Canadians. So please go to peoplesparty.ca and actually read it for yourself and look at our candidates, because a lot of the misconceptions on this stage can be dispelled by you in your own home. One of the things you're going to note as we go is I never talk about Maxime Bernier. I talked about our people. Because when I said on the campaign trail we weren't a party of one, we were a party of many, I meant it. And after the October election, it became a party of one. It was Max's party. He became a dictator, and to this day, he remains a dictator. The members have no power. You're a bunch of serfs. Remember that as we go forward in this video. This next clip is from an environmental debate that was funded by the David Suzuki Foundation. I went there, and close to 300 environmental activists greeted me, and I figured I'd be strung up from the rafters because I intended to tell them that the Carbon Con was just that, a carbon con. Instead of getting strung up, I got applause. Yes, so I'm Frank Vaughn. I have an organic, right now it's a garlic farm up in Codrington. And conservation's been a passion of mine my entire life. And it would be a mistake to assume that I do not care about the environment because of the conception of what the PPC stands for. My worry, and the principal reason that I'm here in this forum, is that the hyper-focus that we put on carbon dioxide is actually detrimental to the overall conservation movement. It doesn't focus on what I would call real drivers of climate change, which are land use habits, and it doesn't focus enough on things like clean water. Now, I did a video at one point, and I sat down with Google Earth, and for 30 minutes I filmed. How many people in the crowd have Google Earth? Show of hands, have you used it? Okay, I'd show you climate change firsthand by going to the Yellow River Valley in China. It is one of the most overdeveloped places on the planet. You can look and you can see from space this gray blotch, and as you zoom in, it's nothing but greenhouses and plastic. If you look at the Indus River, that's another area where you can really see the acute damage that overpopulation and bad land use is causing in those areas. But that being said, I'm up here to present a point of view that maybe you won't like, and that is that CO2 is nowhere near as harmful as some people would present it to be, and that it takes away from the overall focus. And the way that I can present that is by showing you the scientists who say, as relates to anthropogenic global warming, there is no climate emergency in that regard. There are other environmental concerns, and that's something that I would love to talk about and put the focus back on. But CO2 is sucking up all the oxygen in the room, and for me, that's a problem. Thank you.
What steps will you take to create environmental bill of rights which would be recognized at all levels of government?
So I haven't signed that pledge, and one of the reasons I haven't signed that pledge or many other pledges that have come across my desk is before I sign something, I want to be sure of what it means and how it would be implemented. I would, of course, welcome a discussion about the environment and including environmental rights or a guarantee to an environment. I would be happy to have that debate. What we have to understand is it's easy, say, to pass a motion before Parliament that is largely meaningless. It starts to create a cultural shift. And then from that culture shift, we might be able to create a law and pass it through Parliament, and then a government can come along and repeal that law, and it doesn't mean anything. To actually create a right is something that you have to be very careful that you understand what you're creating, and you would have to open up the Constitution and the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which is a more complicated process. You have to pass it through Parliament, then you have to have a referendum, then you have to go back to the provinces and they have to pass referendums, then it has to go through the House, and it has to be 2/3 of the population represented. Like, it's a complicated procedure. And I'm not against that. One of my personal things is I'd like to open the Constitution up and examine not abolishing the Senate, but actually creating an elected Senate. That's a passion of mine. I think we need that. So I'm not against opening up the Constitution, but we have to understand it's more complex than just signing a pledge. I can sign a pledge any day. Anybody can do that. But to actually do something is going to require a little bit more nuance and detail than that.
Canada's obligation under the Paris Climate Agreement is to cut climate pollution by an average of 2% per year, lowering emissions to 30% below 2005 levels. What is your plan to ensure that Canada meets this obligation?
Yeah, I just want to say that the Paris Climate Treaty is primarily concerned with CO2 emissions. Now, in my opening statement, my opening thesis, I indicated that I'd want to transition off the focus on CO2 into things that are of actual environmental concern. The consensus when it comes to CO2 is based on a paper by John Cook. That's where you get the 97% number from. It was derived from a keyword search of several tens of thousands of documents, and the keywords were global warming and man-made climate change. But when they actually examined the paper in the peer review, what they came up with was, instead of 12,000, there was only about 40 papers that supported the idea that man is driving the climate via CO2. Now, as I said in the opening, I'm concerned about the environment, and I'm concerned about actual environmental degradation, as I pointed out. The Paris Climate Treaty will not address water issues, land use issues, or any of those issues. It addresses one thing, CO2, which is why my party would repudiate it.
Thank you. And the need for an economically and environmentally sustainable forestry sector.
I remember a friend of mine, well, he's still alive, I don't have to remember him, he still lives here in town, and he went for environmental sciences. And I remember he went to do some surveying in the far north of Ontario looking at forests. And when he left, he's just like, you know, we can't use any trees, we got to conserve the forests, we can't cut them down. And then when he got back, he's like, there's so many trees, we can use them, we can safely use these things. I wanted to address mitigation of climate change. Again, when we talk about forests mitigating climate change, what they're talking about is CO2 capture. And again, this idea that CO2 is the primary concern bothers me. Now, what forests actually do is, one of the problems we have is water outflow from agricultural land. being polluted, but also the masses of outflow that occur from that. We also have a problem of overdevelopment in our urban areas, in the GTA in particular, but also in other places in the world, and that's a huge issue. Forests are natural captures of rainwater when it falls down. It slows those outflow rates. So green spaces are very vital. They're also vital for just general wilderness promotion, but also wildlife protection. And wildlife is something that Canada has in abundance. So we return. New Brunswick, for instance, is one of those places where mechanized agriculture has sort of taken a fading role, and more space is being put back into trees, and that's something that we can actually do. We can also encourage the growth of the orchard industry. I think there's only, if I'm not mistaken, there's only about 11,000 or 12,000 acres in Ontario that are dedicated to apples anymore. That's a very surprising statistic for me. I found that out at one of these meetings not long ago. So we can encourage development of export when it comes to orchards or peaches. Like, there's a lot of dedicated land uses that we could use that include trees. So I have no issue with tree planting because I've done it myself. Our green spaces are important to me.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I just wanted to point out one of my party's positions that's one of my favorite is that we want to phase out all corporate welfare in general. 1.5 billion is not enough. The taxpayer shouldn't be subsidizing business. Business should be able to thrive on its own. I wanted to make a point about the green economy. The green economy as such right now is propped up by government dollars. And those government dollars are being borrowed against your children's future. So we have to figure out a way to make sure that the spending that we're doing is sustainable and doesn't saddle the future with massive debt. The other thing about the green economy that I would like to highlight is that when it comes to solar and wind, one of the unfortunate truths that we have to deal with is that they're not as clean as they're made out to be. Wind, for instance, this is just from September 13th, wind leaks massive amounts of greenhouse gases. We're talking the equivalent of 1.3 million cars a year from sulfur hexafluoride. And when it comes to solar panels, we lack the facilities and the economy of scale to recycle them and to deal with them. So a lot of that, when they are decommissioned, end up in the landfill. So these are truths that we have to tell ourselves. So we're calling it a price on pollution, but we need to correct our language. It's a price on CO2, carbon dioxide. Now, my low carbon footprint means that it's not a concern for me because it's just not a problem. I'm not a big polluter. But that being said, calling it a price on pollution is a misnomer because it doesn't do a thing about plastics, microplastics in the ocean or bigger plastics in the ocean. It doesn't do anything about single-use plastics. And it doesn't do anything about the overuse of chemicals. And another issue that I have with this is it takes, again, and I'm repeating myself, but it takes the focus off. If you have a revenue neutral carbon tax, what is it actually doing? They take it out of your pocket, and then they're saying they put it back in your pocket, 90% of it, and then 10% basically gets skimmed off the top, and it goes to some sort of mush investment fund, but there's an administration cost of pulling that in. So it's sort of sleight of hand. It doesn't really accomplish a whole lot.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, so it's a bit of a segue, but the world's chief environmental polluters are not in the West. So one of the ways that we can ensure that we are dealing with partners that have better environmental records is by not necessarily dealing with and becoming reliant on China and India and the developing economies. The cleanest countries with the strictest environmental standards are in the West. So we need to strengthen those bilateral agreements. And the issues with NAFTA center around certain key sectors like supply management, autos, steel, softwood lumber, stuff like that. So we need to, it's a separate issue from the environment to get conditions into NAFTA. We have to open NAFTA back up and put some stuff back on the table to get something back. How many people in this audience remember Kyoto? And are familiar with the history of Kyoto and how that worked out? I have a completely different message. It would be very easy for me to sit up on this stage and feed you full of positive quips and virtue signal about what we can do and how we can do it and the time frames that we can do it. But when we do these things, when we make these promises, when we make these big statements, we overlook very real questions. For instance, when it comes to changing the power grid over and switching to green energy, it's not just about changing the power that comes out of your outlet. You have to completely replace the transport grid. And to do so, you have to come up with thousands upon thousands upon thousands of gigawatts of power from somewhere. And you can put on paper a plan to say how you'll get there, but building it is something completely different. So saying that you can get there by 2030 is unrealistic. Anybody in this room, mark it down, that I told you by 2030, we're not going to be there. And that's just realism. We also overlook environmental problems, real environmental problems. For instance, just one for instance, with wind turbines. We have these great big bladed monstrosities, and they are taking out endangered birds all over the world. And there is the environmental consequence of, as I pointed out, the greenhouse gases that they emit. They're notoriously unreliable in terms of storage. And now let's talk about storage. Let's talk about power storage. The amount of toxic chemicals and materials that are in a Tesla battery is something that people don't want to acknowledge. So it's easy to dream big. I like to dream big, but I'm also a realist. We have to ask all of these questions and we have to answer them before we reform and re-engineer society around a dream that is ill-defined in terms of detail. Because to do anything else is to self-deceive, and we will be in the same position as we were with Kyoto because all of this stuff has been said before.
Thank you very much.
So as I'm putting this together, I realized that the questions are mostly reverb festivals, so I'm probably just going to include answers at this point, and you can infer the questions unless I think it's really important. The other thing that I want to note is that in 2019, there were 330, might have been 328, candidates for the PPC that were running all across the country. They were doing it on their own. They had no official support or help from headquarters and the people who were trying to make videos and make guides from HQ to help the EDAs get better organized, the electoral district associations. They were opposed. Those videos were deleted, and that help never came. The entire time, at this point, I'm not making any money. I got a 6-month-old baby at home with my wife. Nobody's around to sell our product and to actually do our business. I had shut down my website. I wasn't collecting any money. I was doing this out of my own pocket. I didn't even submit gas receipts. We were doing such anti-establishment work, or I believed I was doing such anti-establishment work, that I didn't want to expense anything. I just paid for everything out of pocket that I could pay for out of pocket. The entire time, Maxime Bernier was drawing a wage, something like close to $10,000 a month, and he didn't disclose it to anybody. Nobody found out about it until after the election was done. The HQ was consuming all the money, and the rest of us were just working for free. That situation exists to this day. As you know, I am Frank Vaughan, and I'm your PPC candidate in Northumberland and Peterborough South. I'm an organic farmer, a conservationist, a husband, a father, and a political commentator. I'm going to begin with something general. Politicians in general don't tell you the truth as a rule. Instead, they look to polls and surveys while letting the media set the narrative for them. They promise utopia is just over the horizon. All we have to do is tax a little more, borrow a little more, spend a little more, create a tax credit or two, and vote just one more time, yet utopia never seems to arise. The reason they fail is the government has no money. All they have is your money, and the money they borrow in your name. And there is no way in which spending it leads to prosperity. Now, you'll see tonight that these parties agree on almost everything. Their differences come down to the speed of implementation. And I said, listen carefully. Underneath the rhetoric is a sameness that is at the root of all the problems weakening Canada. I am here to present an actual choice, and I will tell you the truth even when you don't want to hear it. That's my purpose. And I want to do one little bit of housekeeping. Last night, the leaders of all these parties labeled my party racist and xenophobic before the eyes of the nation. We have candidates from every ethnic background, every religion, race, color, and creed. And when they take the intellectually lazy path of labeling us racist for wanting to talk about immigration reform, something most Canadians want, they're tokenizing our minorities, and that itself is racist. Thank you. There's two approaches here. we had a bunch of public consultations out in the rural ridings about EORN and how they take the infrastructure dollars. Just about all the feedback that came out of those meetings was that the people didn't want their tax dollars going back into EORN because they've delivered questionable results for a very long time. So the government's answer after all these public consultations was to throw more money at EORN. The problem that we have in this country is monopoly capitalism. We have monopoly telecom companies. There's two ways to approach this. You bust up the CRTC and you allow competition to lower prices. The third world does internet better than we do, and there's a reason for that, and that is monopoly capitalism. Money won't fix this problem. We have to have increased competition. And if we are going to throw public money at this issue, shouldn't we be looking at small providers like WISP and AirNet and all these other local services to expand them? Why are we giving money only one way? Why does ExploreNet get it all? We should be targeting our dollars towards smaller startups that actually deliver better service where they offer it. Yeah, so it's hard to answer this in 1 minute. Economic production creates wealth, and government harvests that wealth to create social programs. So you have to make sure that capital has a welcome place in your country to spawn business and spawn investment. So you can't increase taxation and think that capital is going to stay stationary. It's going to flee. So we have to reduce the regulatory regime, and we have to reduce personal income taxes. We have to stop a carbon tax, and we have to not put a carbon price on it like the Conservatives want to do, because it increased the cost for everybody. We have to reduce the regulatory burden, reduce the tax burden, and encourage people to re-spend their own money. Another way that we have it is, first off, a Bank of Canada plan at a 0% inflation rate, so your money stays worth what it's worth today. And we would also simplify the tax code so that the lower income people that make $15,000 a year wouldn't have to pay any federal taxes, and from $15,000 to $100,000 you'd only pay 15%. That encourages. So, as she said, we can't do it in 60 seconds, but there's two things I'd like to discuss. Number one is immigration. We're adding 1% of our national population to Canada every single year, and half of those people are ending up in the GTA in the Fraser Valley. They're bidding up property, and that is creating the property price boom that's keeping everybody out of the market, all Canadians of every background. And that's why we have to have a conversation about lowering legal immigration. All of these parties are in favor of mass immigration, and they're not analyzing the knock-on effects and how that drives up costs. The other thing is regulatory regimes. It takes a lot of money to even stick a shovel in the ground in this country, because you have to deal with 3 local governments. We have to get out of the way between capital and the projects that they want to build. You have a supply and demand issue. We don't have a supply, and we're driving people into the GTA. We have rising costs, and we have a housing crisis. That's the simple answer. Well, there's a lot that we could talk about there, and of course we're extremely limited. One of the things that we want to do is increase competition in the agriculture market by phasing out supply management. We want to buy back the quota, and we want to allow small competitors into the business. I've worked in farmers markets, and I've worked at helping people establish their businesses for years. They want to raise chicken, they want to raise dairy, they want to have eggs, but they're not allowed to sell it because we have a racket, we have a cartel in this country that prevents small producers from coming in. And that cartel actually has served to reduce the number of family farms in Canada. When it was brought in, we had 62,000 farms that were regulated by supply management. Now there's 12,000. So another thing that we have to discuss is consolidation of land. Often farms are being bought off, the houses are being severed off and sold off separately, and the land is concentrating into fewer and fewer hands. And a lot of those hands these days constitute hands that it's foreign money buying up. I'd like to rebut that, if I could. Yeah, I just want to remind people that China is not our friend. They are ideologically juxtaposed to the West. They have terrible environmental practices, terrible human rights practices, and in general, they're a totalitarian society that jails dissidents. They've jailed 1.5 million Muslims in the North, Uyghur Muslims. They're not our friends. So we need to rebuild our ties with Western democracies that actually share our value systems. Now, how do we do that? None of these people want to actually negotiate supply management, and that is one of the biggest trade barriers with the United States. They want to export safe milk to our markets, and we're protecting a cartel, and that costs us money in auto, it costs us money in steel. The Indian Act is paternalistic, and it has clearly failed. Anybody that wants to go onto a reserve and tell me that the Indian Act has actually worked,
I don't know what planet they're coming from. There's no clean water on the reserves. We're dumping $21 billion a year into the reserves and programs, and we're not making any progress. We talk about saving the world from climate change. We talk about saving the world, we ship billions of dollars overseas in foreign aid, but we haven't actually done anything for our native population. Now, my grandfather was a native. This is an issue that's near and dear to my heart. But we can't go forward on this by looking to the past. We have to get rid of the Indian Act, and we have to replace it with something that's fair. We need to instill private property rights on reserves and give them full autonomy. And we have to create programs that actually will work. Because what we're doing now is failing. I just want to say a government's job is not to virtue signal to individual independent groups. A government's job is to make sure that everybody is represented equally. On this question of pride, some politicians struggle. I don't really struggle. I would have no problem going to a pride parade or even a straight pride parade. I'd go to both ways. What I have an issue with is people who are walking around naked with sex objects taped all over their bodies, and there's little children walking around with them. I don't want to attend a parade that's like that. I don't believe in the sexualization of children, so that's an issue. Well, number one, we will tell the truth regardless of whether or not it's difficult, whether people like it or not. There is a history with ruling parties in this country with being corrupt. Whether it's the SNC-Lavalin case, there's been a lot of pay made about SNC in the media, but what we don't talk about is the Conservative Party history with SNC, whether it was handing them up $1.4 billion in contracts in the Harper years while they were under international sanction, whether it was some of the involvements in Libya, whether or not it was the fact that Stephen Harper's chief of staff became the chairman of SNC after everybody broke up and went to office. We want to get rid of corporate welfare. We want to get rid of government buying favors. We want to represent Canadians equally, and we're the only people who have a very clear platform with specifics about what we will do. And if our party doesn't do it, the entire party will implode, because the only thing that holds it together is trust.
And at this point, I just want to interject that trust was broken. That's why the entire crop of 2019 people are no longer there. The PPC is a not-for-profit corporation that's headed by 4 dudes. There's no constitution and there's no member rights. It relies on new people coming in the door who haven't figured it out. Every one of them figures it out eventually that the party isn't a party. It's disguised as a party. It is legal. I'm not saying anything illegal is going on. It is a very legal scam. And it's not going anywhere because by design, it's not meant to go anywhere. And until Max gets out of the way, it won't go anywhere. You'll see.
Criticism of Plan 2014 isn't a political statement. It's an issue of math. There was a decision made to regulate the outflow of the lake via a dam in Cornwall, and there's more water going into the lake than is exiting the lake. So the waters have gradually risen. That is just a fact of basic math. We also want to stop sending, very specifically, money overseas to developing countries to help them with their environment, because we're not helping them with their environment. Often the governments are just pocketing our tax dollars and they're not doing anything with it. We want to focus on clean water right here, and we want to invest in adaptation strategies with problems that result from natural climate change. Now, we have to replace the emphasis on just CO2 with actual emphasis on things like wilderness protection, wildlife protection, and waterway protection. And another thing we need to look at is the effect of tile draining on waterways, draining massive amounts of water off agricultural land into the waterways, and what that we talk about international trade, but what a lot of people don't know is that we actually have a lot of internal trade barriers within Canada. Under Section 91(2) of the Constitution, internal trade is something that the federal government regulates along with international trade. So what we need to do is make sure that people who are producing something in New Brunswick can actually trade it in Quebec, and the federal government can enforce that. That will create east-west trade. Now, when it comes to international trade, like I said before, we need to create partnerships with our ideological partners in the world and strengthen Western Bloc countries, because an over-dependence on Asia is going to be our downfall. So that's one thing we have to do. And a way that we do that is by engaging in free trade. Now, when I say free trade, what we have, a lot of our bilateral agreements are not free trade. They have tariffs built into them all over the place. We need to actually have fair trade, which means goods flow across borders without any barriers to those goods or charges. And to do that, we have to put something on the table as a nation, because we don't have a lot of bargaining chips. Education is a provincial jurisdiction. There's this constitutional problem that some of these parties' plans present in many different ways, and that is, how do you get around the constitutional designation of provincial jurisdiction when it comes to education? So as a federal MP, I can advocate to the province, but I believe our position is to advocate to the province, not to interfere in the provincial jurisdiction. Now, that being said, I've always been concerned with the way student loans are marketed and with the interest rates that are charged on student loans. It appears to me a lot like usury, and that's a concern, and that is something that I would like to look at. The other thing too is maybe putting an emphasis on education programs and the trades, which we seem to have in short supply. I wonder, when we talk about paying for people's educations, how many liberal arts degrees or how many bachelors of fine arts does the taxpayer have to pay for? It is a crisis, and it's something that I could commiserate with people at length. I've seen it destroy lives, and it's not just opioids. It's methamphetamine, it's heroin, it's crack cocaine. There's a lot of drug problems on our streets. I do have concerns with plans to render all personal drug possession of all hard drugs legal. If you provide the needle and you provide the drugs and you provide a facility to do it, I worry that it will end up much like the methadone program, which I knew people that were in the methadone program in the 90s and the early 2000s. They would go and get their drink, and then they'd be coming home and they'd be doing drugs. They'd be doing various other kinds of drugs. So I worry about that. I hold with the unpopular opinion, because we have been propagandized for so long, that CO2 is not a major pollutant. And I also hold, as a conservationist, that the focus on CO2 takes our focus off of real environmental issues. There's all sorts of degradation in our midst. We have several decommissioned mines within this area. Nobody talks about cleaning them up, because all we're talking about is regulating the very air you breathe. Now, if we go over geological time, we can see that CO2 rises and falls quite independent of temperature. And we also know that for the last 11,000 years, we have been seeing ice retreat all over the world. The fact that we're sitting here right now is thanks to an interglacial warm period. If it gets cold, we all die. So the idea that Canada can basically deindustrialize and somehow save the planet, while China and India and all the developing countries are bringing on fossil fuel use by record, I don't want to see our prosperity go away. Well, they are. So I want to get this straight. We're charging a tax that is cost neutral and costing no one anything. So what's the point of charging the tax? What does it actually accomplish? It's like smoke and mirrors. Even if you accept that CO2 is the great evil pollutant of our time, they're not actually tackling the problem. They're just creating a structure. And when you say there's no administration, of course there is. You have to collect the tax, and then you have to ship it out to all the individuals. And I question whether any of it really gets there. I mean, I would have to look at the numbers. But as to polluting subsidies and subsidizing polluting companies, the PPC, you'll be rest assured, opposes all corporate subsidy. We want to get out of that business altogether. We want business should be able to sustain itself. And any new taxation is a net drain on an already overtaxed society. Almost 50 cents on every dollar that you earn is going to go back in taxation regardless. So I don't know how more taxation solves this problem. It hasn't really solved anything so far. It's created a lot of other issues, throwing money. There's lots of talk about new spending, guaranteed incomes for everybody in Canada, and I would wonder how the federal government would do that, because again, welfare is a provincial jurisdiction, so I'm not sure how you get through around the Constitution. I've asked that numerous times. We won't cut social services to seniors, that's number one. But we also have to look at the sustainability of the system. And by that, I mean, we have to make sure that the government isn't overspending. It'd be very easy for me to promise money, but no government can honestly do that at this stage, because we're borrowing against the future to pay for yesterday's promises, let alone today's promises. So the number one thing that we can do is make sure the books are in order. Another thing that's seldom talked about is, again, the effects of immigration on this file. If someone immigrates to the country and they're over 65, they qualify to get some sort of social help, but they've never paid into the system. This is another reason why we have to analyze what kind of immigration we have in the country. So there's a lot of things we can do. You can't explain it in a minute. We want to build all the pipelines. And the reason we want to do that is we have to be realistic. Pipelines can be done safe. Trains are incredibly dangerous, and we're going to get fossil fuels from somewhere. We can talk all day about green economies, but it's going to take a longer time than anybody's talking about here to actually build it. It takes massive inflows of government dollars, your dollars, to create these so-called economies. Pipelines have to be built, and I would rather get our oil and our fuel products from Alberta than I would from Saudi Arabia with its terrible human rights record, its terrible treatment of women, and its terrible extremism. I would rather buy it right here. Pipelines are also a unity issue. This might not resonate in Northumberland County, but if we don't build pipelines from Alberta and we don't do something on the equalization file, which transfers money from Alberta to the rest of the country, we're going to have a Western separatist movement. Now, I've been the prophet of doom on the Western separatist issue because there is a growing issue, and it threatens to destroy this country, and none of these people want to talk about it. Equalization and pipelines. If we don't do it, we're going to lose our country. Money alone will fix nothing. Governments have been throwing money at this problem for a very long time, and the only thing that they get in return is expanding wait times, and nobody wants to have it. Takes me a year. I got a bad knee. It takes me a year to get in to see my specialist, and by that time I've already solved the problem somewhere else because that's basically what I have to do to get by. Healthcare is a provincial jurisdiction. One of the things the PPC would do very specifically is instead of collecting tax and sending it back to the provinces, we would let the provinces collect that money directly so there's not some bureaucracy in Ottawa taking money off it. The other thing that we have to do, there's always comparisons with other countries with universal medicine and how they do it better. But there's no discussion in this country about how those countries with universal medicine do it better. We can talk about pharmacare all day, we can talk about cost, but until we examine the structural issues with healthcare, we won't be able to solve anything. Politics is broken. It's that simple. We have a consolidation of options, is what I call it. Whether they want to admit it or not, these four parties represent the same positions, just different methods of implementation, as I said in my opening statement. Now, they're going to say that it's not true, but it is. They unify on the approach to healthcare. They unify on the approach to climate change. They unify on the approach. I guess they differ on pipelines because there are two parties down there that want to just completely deindustrialize Canada, and there's two parties that want to do a little something. I'm also sick of politicians who can't answer straight questions. I just want to provide answers. I want to give you a choice. You can vote for it or you can choose not to vote for it. And I would also encourage people, if you don't like me and my party, and you don't like these parties, maybe get involved in creating more, because European-style democracies thrive on more choice, not less. And I've also been representing people for most of my life, so I feel like I would do that naturally very well. And I've been doing it for free too, so getting paid for it would be nice.
Gee, did my comments on pipelines age well? The unity problem, has equalization been fixed? Did we build the pipelines? Are we now facing a crisis with the United States over opioids, over unfair trade, our tariffs on them, which people don't seem to understand? We charge them. We keep them out of our market. They send in excess of $200 billion in capital our way. Well, now they're sick of it because they're sick of being name-called. They're sick of defending us. They're sick of doing these things, and we haven't built any resilience. I'm talking about it in 2019. Here we are 5 years later, and they're just starting to talk about the things I was saying then.
The first question has to do with attainable housing in Northumberland County. Housing sales in Northumberland County are up 20% over 2018, with the average price of a home sold in August at $508,000. With a vacancy rate of less than 1% in many Northumberland communities, rental units are either unavailable or unaffordable for most people. How will you address the supply-cost issue for housing in Northumberland?
So we have to address the real causes of rising home prices, and real causes are demand. There's more demand than there is supply, as people have said up here. But where is that demand coming from? There's a lot of foreign money flowing into our country and speculating in the real estate market, buying up land, buying up large swaths of Saskatchewan. There's also a lot of new immigration. We have, basically we're adding 1% of our population every single year in legal immigration, and then we have another 400,000 to 500,000 that come in various other ways as temporary workers or students or with visas. They create a large amount of demand, and a lot of that demand is coming out of the cities and driving up prices out here, which is one of the reasons we have to have an immigration discussion and why every single poll shows that we have to have a discussion around immigration reform. So those are some things we have to investigate right now. The other thing is the regulatory burden. There are 3 layers of government that you have to go through to start building, and it can cost an extraordinary amount of money in red tape, and that's something that we have to get out of the way of. If we want to increase supply, we have to get people to invest in building, and the way we do that is getting out of the way. The solution is not more government, it's less government. And that's something that when we talk about boutique tax credits, or we talk about things and tweaking, and we talk about changing the stress test around, I worry that if we reduce the requirements for people to buy homes, and I'm having an issue refinancing right now because, quite frankly, I don't make enough money, so the bank doesn't want to touch me. I'm not sure that's a bad thing, because if I get into a situation where I can't pay and I lose my home, what good is it that I was able to buy one in the first place? So there's a lot of real causes that we have to look at as a country, and unfortunately we don't seem to want to have these difficult discussions, which is one of the reasons I'm here right now. I always hear lots of talk about new government programs to subsidize things, whether it's building 500,000 homes, whether it's helping people with their closing costs. There's all these promises to spend. But we run deficits, and we've been running deficits for about 50 years fairly consistently. We've had a couple brief pauses, but we pile on national debt to the point that we pay billions of dollars every single month at various levels of government to finance the promises of the past that haven't exactly solved our problems. So my point is, rather than have the government build your housing, remove the barriers between capital and those development projects, you can build the supply, housing prices fall, you examine immigration and make sure that it's serving Canada's economic needs. That's what we have to do. Nothing else will really put a dent in the problem.
According to the Council of Canadians, our current trade deal with the United States and Mexico is hurting our Northumberland dairy farmers. How will you address this crisis?
90% of Canadian farms are not supply managed. Whether you're beef, your pork, your vegetables, or in my case, I grow garlic. And I compete directly with China. I tend to sell my garlic for about 10 times the price of Chinese garlic, and I win because I have quality, whereas the Chinese don't. What we would do is actually phase out supply management. We would buy back the quota over 5 years, and we would allow dairy producers in this country to export. We would also allow smaller dairy producers into the market. Right now, if you want to have a small herd of dairy and you want to sell your products, whether they're cheese or whether it's poultry or eggs, you can't do that. You're simply not allowed in the market. As a person who's run farmers markets for the past 15 years, I have said no to so many people who want to get into this game because there's a big cartel of the richest producers in this country that holds them out of the game. Now, other countries have done this. Australia and New Zealand have both, they had supply management systems and they phased it out, and now they have some of the strongest export economies when it comes to dairy because there is an intense global demand and our dairy products can't get to market. Ontario went through this with wine. When it came to, we had supply management in Ontario, nobody wanted to get rid of it, and now we have one of the world's premier wine export industries. We can do this, we should do this, and furthermore, we talk a lot here about helping the poorest among us. Supply management costs the poorest among us an extra $500 a year to buy these basics. And you might say it's about supply safety, but supply safety is actually handled by the CFIA. Supply management doesn't have anything to do with supply safety. So for those who are worried about hormones coming into the country through milk, that is regulated by the Canadian Food Inspections Agency. It would still be illegal for that milk to come into the country. So we have a different approach. We think it's the fair approach, and we think it represents the best interests of everybody, and it gives people time to adapt. So there were 62,000 family dairy operations when supply management was brought in by Pierre Elliott Trudeau. That's now reduced to 12,000. It's actually reduced the amount of farms. It hasn't actually protected. It's reduced the amount of farms by roughly 85%. When it comes to localism, which is what I heard up here, you want small producers that can go to farmers markets and can actually interact directly and market their products directly. That's what I do. That's how people know me in the community. They know me as the garlic guy or the vegetable guy or the plant guy because I market directly. You can't do that
when it comes to dairy or chicken. When you want to raise chickens, you have to jump through all these loopholes that have nothing to do with supply safety and everything to do with protecting supply management and protecting that market. So at first you could only have 150 chickens. Now it's 300 chickens, but you're not allowed to, formerly it was, for the longest time, you're not allowed to tell anybody that you have chicken for sale unless they ask you. It's basically like masonry. Unless they ask you, you can't talk about it. These arcane, you can't sell them at farmers markets. I'm out of time.
That is time. In 2018, the Canadian federal government spent $24.4 million of its $40 million advertising budget on Facebook ads. Given that companies such as Facebook, Amazon, Instagram, Netflix, and Twitter do not pay taxes in Canada, how does your party plan to address the lack of tax revenue from the big tech companies?
So right off the bat, to get that out of the way, any company that's doing business in Canada should have to pay Canadian taxes. That's just flat out, and that's something that we'd have to fix. But we're talking about the reason that wealth puts its money in tax havens is because we have a high effective tax rate. Capital is not stationary. The more the takers try to take it, the more they will flee the country and put their money somewhere else. So one of the issues that we have in this country is overly high taxation. 50% of every dollar earned is taken back in taxes. And that affects the poor, and it affects the middle class as well. So in our party, when it comes to taxation, first off, we want to get rid of corporate welfare. That's right off the top. All corporate welfare has to go. There's very little of it that's actually productive to the Canadian taxpayer. We want to stop exporting tax dollars overseas in the forms of foreign aid going to despots. We want to develop the Canadian economy. Instead of buying Saudi Arabian oil with their horrible human rights records, we want to have our oil sourced from Alberta. We want to we want to raise the federal exemption for income taxes to $15,000 right out the gate, and we want to change the tax code from 5 classifications to 2. So that from $15,000 to $100,000, you'd be taxed at a 15% tax rate, and then over $100,000, you'd be at 25%. We also want to gradually phase out capital gains tax, which means if you have investment income, you don't have to be rich to have investment income, but the government here takes a lot of that. We want to get rid of that to encourage people to invest capital. You have to get government out of the way of investment. All of these things go a long way to saving everyone money equally. We're all about people paying their fair share, but we also understand that if you tax the rich, as is being advised, more and more, they will just leave. Capital leaves. What are you going to do, pass a law to keep them here? In one way, I'm going to agree. We should have never bailed out GM. We should have never bailed out Bombardier. We should have never bailed out SNC Lavalin. We shouldn't have been bailing out these companies all along, and that's a legacy of all ruling parties in this country. And they do end up leaving anyway. But why do they end up leaving anyway? They leave because it's too expensive to do business here, period. They go to South Carolina where there's incentives. They go to Mexico where it's cheaper. They leave jurisdictions. Capital will leave if you try to take it, which is why you have to have a competitive taxation system and why you have to have a competitive regulatory regime. Now, don't let the suit fool you. I'm just some poor farmer up the road, but I understand capital. And as much as I might envy the rich at times for the lack of problems that they have compared to me, I understand that if we try to reach in their pockets too deep and take it all, they'll just leave and then we have nothing. If you want to increase your tax base, you have to create a favorable environment for capital to come in.
The current government of Canada will not meet its own 2030 carbon emission reduction targets. What does your party plan to do to reduce carbon emissions? And again, Frank.
Our party plans to repudiate the Paris Climate Treaty. Our party plans to not charge a carbon tax, not charge a carbon price, and get out of the carbon pricing game. We are not focusing on what I would term real environmental issues, and for the record, conservation is the first thing that motivated me to passion. Whether it was tree planting or operating my organic farm, I care about things like glyphosate. We've been saying it causes cancer for 15 years. Finally, we're getting recognition in the courts that it does. We're not talking about Eldorado Mines, which is continuing to leak leachate into the Moyer water basin, polluting it. We don't talk about these real environmental concerns. All we talk about is CO2. CO2 is plant food. We can't control the Earth's climate through government action, and nobody else on this stage is going to tell you that. I'm sitting in front of, I was asked actually at one of the debates,
Bring some names of scientists who disagree with the so-called consensus. I have 90 in front of me, and they're not funded by oil wealth. They're public scientists. They cannot get heard. There's another 500 that are doing a meeting in Oslo, and their names and their mandate is going to be revealed October 18th. You will never hear about it in the media. The consensus has no place in science. There's an anecdote that I like to tell about a man named Alfred Wegener, and it's important because he's an example of how science works. He said that continents drift on top of magma, and he was destroyed by the geological profession when he said it. But we now know that continental drift is a reality of geology. When people say consensus in science, run the other way. And I can show you, if anybody wants, I can show you failed predictions. I can show you the models and how they've failed to predict reality, and I'm using their data. We can't get a seat at the table. And I'm not here to satisfy. It would be so easy to just go with this game. But I can't do that because it's dishonest.
Thank you, Frank. And Kim.
Rising seas to obliterate nations by the year 2000. Maldives, gradual rise in average sea level is threatening to completely cover this island nation in the next 30 years, 1988. The 97% consensus number that you've all heard so much about was derived by a guy named John Cook by running a keyword search on papers. The keyword search was global warming and global climate change. He came up with 12,000 papers that had those words in them. But upon examining in the peer review, only 64 papers actually concluded that man was the chief driver of climate change. That's your 97% number. We have Arctic will be ice-free by 2018. Didn't happen. Arctic will be ice-free by 2016. Didn't happen. Arctic will be ice-free by 2013. Didn't happen. I've got the stats right here from the National Snow, Ice, and Data Center that can show you we're still within one standard deviation. If you go back before
In the last several weeks, Brighton residents have learned that more doctors will be leaving the area in the coming months. As an area that is already experiencing a shortage of physicians, this will put even more financial pressure on our hospital emergency wards, after-hours clinics, and on residents who require medical attention. What will your party do to attract more doctors to rural areas and reduce the pressure that our hospitals and residents are experiencing?
When it comes to healthcare, the issue is clearly complex. Canada is a unique nation in the world. We often talk about other OECD countries that are in Europe and how they do universal medicine, because everybody here, I believe, likes having universal coverage. It makes life easy, and we know that we can get it. But in other countries that do healthcare better than we do healthcare, they have private delivery in some places. Now, before you freak out, that just means a clinic that has a private or a profit motivation, but you're still universally covered. You don't pay out of pocket. You still keep your universal insurance, but now they're motivated to be efficient. We often talk about pharmacare. Why do other countries have pharmacare plans? And that's the comparison, OECD countries, but we don't talk about the whole approach that they take to healthcare. There's a reason that most of these countries deliver better than we do. We have to have a big conversation. Now, that being said, the Constitution's clear. Healthcare is a provincial jurisdiction, and the reason it was set out that way is because what works in Ontario won't work in New Brunswick, won't work in Nova Scotia, etc. So the federal government right now collects money in the form of taxation and then sends it back to the provinces in health transfers and takes a little bit off the top for the bureaucracy that administers it. Part of our platform plan is to transfer the GST directly to the provinces so they collect it themselves, they have more money to deal with their individual issues, and the federal government doesn't have to handle that money before it goes back. So we transfer those tax points directly. We have to create an atmosphere in Canada that can draw doctors in, and one of the ways that we can do that is by looking at what other OECD countries are doing that draws doctors to those countries. So you can have your universal coverage, but you can have much more efficient delivery. And people are scared to have that conversation. I understand why, because there's this myth that as soon as you mention that, that it means you're going to lose your coverage, but it doesn't. We've done it in Canada. We've had pilot projects all over the country. They work so well that they get shut down by the government. Just for the record, once again, I want to state it's a misnomer to say that I'm talking about getting rid of universal coverage. First off, I would only be able to advocate for the things I'm talking about at the provincial level. The federal government doesn't have control over it, so I would have to go to the province and talk about it. What I am talking about is looking at other nations that have universal coverage and deliver far better services. They don't have wait times for surgeries. They don't have wait times for heart. They have pharmacare programs. They do it for far less than we do. Why aren't we learning? They have universal coverage. Only Canada, I think it's Canada and North Korea, it's the only place where you can't have some kind of private delivery that competes with the national health care system. We spend $690 million alone every single year in the United States for people trying to get care that they can't get here. I've got a bad knee. It takes me a year to get in to see a specialist. That's unheard of in other countries. So we have to look at how they do it. And that's a difficult conversation that people don't want to have. And for some reason, nobody wants to have that discussion.
The gas and oil industry currently receives billions and billions of dollars in subsidies from Canadian taxpayers. Many people believe that the sustainable economy should receive an equal opportunity for growth. How will your party transition workers in Canada away from the current carbon-based economy to support jobs in a sustainable economy?
So in general, if it's not obvious from the opening statement, my party is against any corporate welfare and against business subsidy. We believe that companies should be able to stand on their own and should be able to function without the taxpayer footing the bill. Now, I want to be realistic here. It's not just about transitioning our power in our sockets to sustainable renewable energies, as they call them, whether it's solar, wind, whatever, but it's also, when they talk about this and phasing it out by 2050, you have to replace the entire transport grid. And to do that, you have to come up with gigawatts, thousands of gigawatts of power from somewhere. And nobody can really explain where that comes from. So I'm fine with the fact that eventually we hit peak oil, we start to run out of oil. I understand that. I don't like buying Saudi oil. I would much prefer to have Albertan oil. But if we even agree on transitioning out of this, we have to build new pipelines from Alberta so that we can refine our own products right here, cut out the middleman, and then we can work our way off it if that's what we're going to have to, because peak oil is a reality. That's a harder reality. So we have to be realistic about that. And at the same time, we need to build more pipelines, not less. We have to build Trans Mountain. We have to find a private buyer for that to get that done. I'd like to see Energy East resurrected and get our own bitumen to refineries in Quebec. And I'd like to see this a halt to the 2 or 3 mile trains that are coming across this country hauling oil. And you can read about the derailments every single day. Pipelines can be done safely. They can be well regulated and managed. And that's why we have to build them. And if we don't, this is another problem that might not resonate locally, but there is a growing separatist sentiment in the West. If we don't deal with it, in the next 5 to 10 years, we will have another separatist issue, and it won't be in Quebec.
Thank you. And Philip.
All right, so always a tough act following you, Frank. So much passion, it's fantastic.
There's a lot there I want to cover. The amazing thing about studies and projections is that they often fail. And that's to Jeff about talking about these fantastic numbers when it comes to sustainable energy. It's all projections. And to Mallory, if you actually talk to people in the West and you tell them that what they want is jobs and sustainable energy, you might not walk out of the building in safety. They want pipeline jobs. That's what they want. I talk to them all the time, and that's what they want. They have enough oil there to last 80 to 100 years. They can meet all of Canada's needs, but they can't get their oil to market, and they can't get it to refineries. And when it comes to other countries getting off oil and coal, China and India are crushing us. They're the polluters in the world, and they don't care. They're laughing at us as they take us over. They're taking us over economically big time, and nobody wants to talk about that. Well, I would advise you as somebody who's got a 4-month-old son that you should just go ahead and have those kids, because they're just the most beautiful experience that you will ever have in your life. And the biggest issue with the climate alarmism that we face is that people are living in fear like that, and that's one of the reasons why I'm trying to bring realism to the table. But I'm going to go in a different direction for the rest of my closing statement, because I used an anecdote earlier about Western anger, trying to highlight the fact that you might not walk out of a room if you brought up some of these issues in physical safety. We used to understand what an anecdote meant, and political correctness has killed the use of anecdotes. I want people to understand Western anger. Because we in Ontario and we in the East are going to be the people who keep this country together by listening to the West. If we don't, in 5 years, we are going to have a huge issue in this country, and it's not just pipelines, it's equalization. None of these parties want to talk about equalization, but it's robbing the West, and it's driving a wedge into the heart of this country. And we absolutely have to start talking about it. And the other thing I wanted to talk about is an actual problem. On Sunday, I hosted an event. We brought a gay Jewish man in the form of Dave Rubin up from the United States to have a speech in defense of free speech. It was opened by a man named Salim Mansour, who is a Muslim immigrant to this country, who wanted to talk about free speech and the importance of free speech. We had everybody in the room. We had a multi-ethnic crowd. And yet we were shouted down outside as Nazis. We were punched in the face, and we faced violence from the radical left that nobody wants to talk about. If we don't learn how to have conversations in this country again about difficult subjects, we will sunder. So we have to learn how to talk to each other. I share that in common with the message up here tonight. We have to have conversations, even difficult ones.
Thank you, Frank.
I got to be honest with you, looking back on these now, hearing them for the first time in 5 years, it makes me kind of emotional. The country's exactly where I said it would be. I didn't even know I was saying that. I mean, I've been consistent this entire time. Maybe I missed it by 1 year, but here we are, 5-6 years down the road, and we are facing a national, not just a national unity crisis, we're facing a sovereignty crisis. We are surrounded. We are a mouse being played upon by cats, and we had an opportunity to do something different. Now I live in the West. I always said I would end up here. Well, now I'm here. This is the hill I'm going to die on. When I was in the East and I lived there my entire life, I was an advocate for this side of this nation, and nobody wanted to listen. Well, now we're here. The nation has left us behind. Isn't it time we left this nation behind and struck out on our own and did something unique and did something better? We could create a republic out here, or we could join the United States. We can't do worse than what Canada has done to us for 150 years.
So there I was, after a day's work, in the field planting garlic. That's where I've been for the last 2 days. And I came inside, and I snuggled with my kid for a while, had about 20 minutes after I showered, and it was wonderful. I revel in his smiles. They're about the greatest thing the world has ever given me. And it was at that point that I pick up my cell phone and check my text messages, because I don't take it with me in the field. And there's a text there that my sign has got a big fat swastika drawn on it in marker. I mean, it's relatively crude. I would be surprised if it actually wasn't so crude. But what does it say? We have a party with candidates that are of Jewish descent whose grandparents survived the Holocaust. We have supporters of every ethnic background. We have every kind of candidate, every kind of religion that you could possibly imagine. And this is still what we have to deal with. This sort of vandalism. And what does it say about society and where we're going as a society? This label cheapens history, and that's my problem with it. I'm actually not surprised. It's a huge sign. I mean, it took a lot of effort to get this thing together, and I've been waiting for this, to be perfectly honest. I don't know why it hasn't happened sooner, and that's sad, because when I read the text message, I wasn't surprised at all. You know that sinking feeling that you're supposed to get, I suppose, when somebody targets you and says malicious things? I didn't get that. I didn't get that flutter in my stomach. I didn't get anything. I just put my camera together, grabbed my gear, and came down here to see how bad it was. Now, admittedly, it's not that bad. It's not very big, so I can probably come up with something that'll just cover that over, and we'll see if whatever moron wants to come back and do it again. But it's such a statement about where we are as a society. It's funny, because as I work, I've been listening to psychologists talk about the horrors of the concentration camp and how the English created the concentration camp and how the communists under Lenin more or less began the process of perfecting what Hitler would later deploy. And this sign is thrown around casually, yet we see the hammer and sickle blazing on Union flags and at protests. Protests down in Hamilton, where we have a Jewish man, a gay Jewish man, come up from the United States. The function was opened by a Muslim man who immigrated to this country. And we have to face people outside who, some of them, under the hammer and sickle, are labeling us as Nazis, and they don't understand the contradiction. And that is a problem. Like, what are we teaching in schools these days? Why aren't we teaching Solzhenitsyn? Why aren't we teaching Ayn Rand? Why aren't we talking about the horrors of totalitarianism and rampant collectivism as they manifest in all their different forms, not just this one? And what does this have to do with me anyway? What does this have to do with our policies? I've been to 8 debates. I think it's 8 debates. Maybe it's 7 debates. I've lost track of how many I've been to. And I've had a good reception everywhere, even people who disagreed with me on certain things. The climate change debate was a little bit testy, to say the least, but they would at least acknowledge me. They would at least talk to me. They would at least engage. I never got any of this. I never got any hate. And in this town, of all towns, I have been feeding people's children for 15 years. Every race, color, and creed. It doesn't matter where they come from. I mean, nobody will take this seriously around here. This name and that sign have nothing to do with each other. And the people here know that. This is, I would guess, this is a product of a high school student. I mean, it's really crude. I don't really know. But if I had to guess, this isn't the work of a party or our opposition, even though I just want to give a message to the NDP candidate in this riding. This is the sort of hatred and bigotry that you feed when you call the PPC racist to score cheap political points. You defile history with your casual labels. You defile history, and as I've said before, you tokenize the plethora of minorities that are involved in our party who want to espouse our ideas. You say we're anti-immigration. You say our immigration policy is racist. How can it be racist when it's a pro-immigration policy? It talks about bringing people in and keeping people coming in. It just talks about making the system sustainable. It's an idea that resonates with Canadians of all different backgrounds, be they first, second, or third generation. It's a reasonable position. But when you call us racist so casually as you have, first off, you tokenize us, which makes me question whether you are the racist or not, but you also feed this dynamic. This labeling, this casual defiling of history to score cheap political points. Because that's what this is. Whoever did this doesn't actually know what a Nazi is. When they think Nazi, they think Hitler, but they don't think of the psychosis, the psychology that underlies it. They don't think about what other manifestations this psychology has taken in the world, including communism, including various forms of totalitarianism. Many of them who use this label are themselves very friendly to communism because they don't understand what communism is or its legacy in the world. It always starts the same with beautiful rhetoric, but it always ends in people eating their babies, their own children. It always ends in people in concentration camps, in horror. That's what the rule of the technocracy creates. That's what the oligarchy creates. But I'm going to leave this up. I'm probably not going to call it in until the morning because I don't care, let the world see this vain accusation and know how foolish it is. And I hope whatever student did this, I'm betting it's a kid. Whatever kid did this, I really hope they wake up to the reality that this is actually part of the process that dooms us to repeat history, that sets us on the course towards repetition, which we tend to do every 80 to 100 years, and we have since human history began. A cycle that we have to break right now. We have to engage reason right now. We have to actually dig deeper than human beings have ever dug in their life, because the onset of no more frontiers to conquer combined with nuclear weapons means if we don't engage reason now, there's a good guarantee that we will destroy every single thing that we love and value in our society. And part of that destruction begins right here, by throwing this symbol around without actually knowing what it means. It's very difficult for me to take offense to something so callously ignorant. And it's very hard for me, at the same time, to say nothing in its face. to not push back and call on my political adversaries and call on our opponents who keep casually labeling us as racist, think about what you're doing. This is you. This is what you're doing. You're creating the labels that you claim to oppose. You're engaging in the bigotry of isolating the people who support our party of every ethnic background, race, color, and creed. You're supporting their isolation from the political conversation. You're tokenizing them and in fact engaging in racism yourself. This is a message to Jagmeet Singh. This is a message for anybody who speaks like him and so callously wants to dismiss us from the table and ignore the diversity of our party. It's so obscene.
And after reviewing it, I'm deciding to include the Ottawa documentary. The sound quality is poor. I'm going to see what I can do with it with my video editor before I include it. But this goes back to, I believe it's 2017, so you can see what I was up to back then. So
Get the fuck away from me.
now what?
Get the fuck away from
This
me.
isn't a conversation, my friend. This isn't rational. You're acting
Fuck
like
you.
a grade schooler.
Fuck you.
Look how shaky you are. You're being so emotional.
So we just got back from the Gong Show that was the rallies on Parliament Hill in Ottawa. There was an attempt made by several groups to have a peaceful rally to exercise their right to peaceful assembly at Parliament Hill. They were met with a massive counter-protest by an exceptionally violent Antifa. Antifa is a group that ostensibly exists to combat hate and racism. At least that is what they claim. But as you'll see in this video, there is no more hate-filled group in Canada today than Antifa. Now, in the interest of full disclosure, I was set to speak at a rally by the Canadian Coalition of Concerned Citizens. Most of their opinions are pretty moderate. There's some stuff in there like mandatory conscription because they think it would be good for character that I don't necessarily agree with, but I do support their right to have a rally and express their views. There are two primary reasons why I didn't deliver my speech. Number one was the presence of a group called the Northern Guard. And quite frankly, I do not want to be associated with that particular group. The second reason was I had $3,000 worth of camera gear and I was concerned for my safety and my cameraman's. That being said, there's absolutely nothing the Northern Guard did today that could possibly compare to the trouncing of our rights by the communists in Antifa. And not just communists. OPSU was there, CUPE was there. Marching alongside the hammer and sickle were the flags of Ontario's unions. They were assaulting people, beating people up, doing everything they could in their power to shut down speech. And I walked among them and tried to talk to them, and I'm going to show you footage from that. But first, we're going to start a little mellow with what we did on Friday. First up, on Friday, we noticed some people protesting on Parliament Hill that actually had legitimate grievances. This was a minority group protesting Pakistani treatment of political dissidents. There's going to be a recurring theme throughout this video, which is that when it comes to actual problems, Antifa, the left, and all the virtue signaling unions couldn't give a damn about legitimate problems facing our world. They're bullies. They like easy targets. They never deal with anything tough. The people you are about to see are trying to get a message to Justin Trudeau and his government about something very real, involving a lot of people who are suffering and people being disappeared and killed by a country that is receiving billions in aid from Canada.
So we've seen some activity going on over here. Demonstrators, stop violence against religious minorities. How you guys doing? Does anybody want to talk about the cause here? We're just curious. We were in the neighborhood, so you, sir? Yeah, so what do we got going on here?
We are protesting against the people who have been forcibly abducted by the Pakistani security agencies without any case, registering any case. Almost 160 people has recently been abducted from their houses in Sindh province. And since 2010, almost 1,200 has been abducted, no whereabouts. No case registered, nothing. Their families, dear ones, are very concerned. We are concerned and we are requesting for Canadian government to help us and press Pakistani government to for human rights abuses should end.
These are the people that are being abducted by police agencies, security agencies, intelligence forces, no charge, no arrest warrant, no court, no report, no follow-up on their whereabouts, and a number of them are being found dead with signs of torture months later. This is the problem.
So would it be safe to say then that some of the money that goes towards foreign aid in Pakistan requires a little bit more oversight, and you'd like to put some requirements, human rights requirements on those dollars?
Absolutely. That's 100% what we're looking for. Any aid we would like to see linked to a stop of human rights abuses, particularly in Sindh and Balak.
That seems completely reasonable. You got my back. I got your back on that one.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
So there you have it, some very real abuses being perpetrated by people who are getting the benefit of Canadian tax dollars. And by shining a spotlight on their cause, I have already done more than Antifa ever has to advance the cause of justice in the world. Instead of shadowboxing with mythical problems that don't actually exist, Antifa could focus on actual crimes against humanity occurring in the world today. But they won't, because that would actually represent hard work. The very hard work that these people are trying to advance. And for all those people who on and off camera today, as you will see, called me a racist, bigot, homophobe, I just want to note that I actually give a damn about minority causes. Up next, one of the brainiacs that I've had occasion to argue with over the past several years is a certain fellow who, among other things that he's managed to get totally wrong in his life and in his arguments, denied the existence of the Human Rights Commission because it failed to fit into his narrative of life. Now, I have to give credit where credit is due. I've never seen a person who could employ circular logic or jump around from topic to topic every time he loses quite like this man. Chris, this next segment is for you, buddy.
I am out front of the Canadian Human Rights Commission. It actually does exist. They were set up to basically stop crimes against humanity around the world. And some of the decisions that they have made have centered around making sure that the world is safe from David Icke talking about reptilians and ensuring that pastors marry gay people and stuff like that. So I just want Chris to know the building does exist. I tried to get an interview, but I got a card instead. I'm going to have to set it up, but I'll follow up with you, Chris.
Now, Chris being Chris might say that he never denied the existence of the commission. He denied the existence of tribunals. The best I could do for Chris was find a third-year law student who confirmed that her interest was in human rights tribunals.
So I'm standing out here with
Christina Jonet
and Daniel Postolov.
So what brings you to the Supreme Court? What attracted you to this building? Hopefully not legal problems?
No, I'm a law student in my third year, and I just wanted to see what it looks like.
So you're in law school. What law school?
University of Windsor Law.
So what do you hope to do with your law degree?
You know what? Maybe something along the lines of human rights tribunals and human rights claims.
Chris, my wayward friend, keep trying. You'll play in the big leagues one day. Next up, we visited with the Sir John A. Macdonald Monument on Parliament Hill.
So we're standing at Parliament Hill, and we're in front of the Sir John A. Macdonald Monument, the founding father of our country, and also one of the people that's under attack by the current SJW liberal paradigm. They find the very edifice of our founding father to be offensive. And I would tell you that it's an easy target. That's why they're targeting it, because you can attack John A.'s vestige and get nothing done. But the hard problems that face our world are something else. The difficult tasks are something they leave alone. So let's hope that we can keep Sir John A. as part of our Canadian heritage.
And before we get back to Antifa's despicable behavior today on Parliament Hill, on Friday I had the good fortune of running into Brad Trost and to talk to him about the NFA data breach which is being pegged on his campaign.
So I'm out front of Parliament Hill. It's Friday, the day before the rally. I'll be speaking here tomorrow. I was just walking up here to check out the scenery, and I ran into Brad Trost of the Conservative Party of Canada, and I just let him know that I'm very happy that he's fighting the charge that he was the one that leaked the data to the NFA. And he let me know off camera that they're going to fight that. He's going to prove his innocence, that they have suspicions as to who did the data breach, but they don't have any proof, so they can't make any sort of accusations. But he needs to clear his name so that he can stand for re-election, legally fundraise, and know what's going on with his life. But I've said from the very beginning that Brad Trost was a patsy. He was set up to fall and take it, and I'm so happy that he's not taking it, and he's standing up to the Conservative Party.
Quick reminder, somebody at the Conservative Party of Canada leaked the member list to the NFA, the National Firearms Association, who then illegally used that data to solicit funds from Canadians, myself included. The Conservative Party then blamed Brad Trost instead of the likely culprits in an attempt to save face. This is just part of the fallout from the very divisive and suspect leadership election that just concluded this spring. And no visit to Ottawa would be complete without stopping by the headquarters of Deloitte.
We're standing out here in front of Deloitte's Ottawa office, and I just wanted to take a minute to remind people that an oft-repeated myth is that the Conservative Party had its leadership vote audited by Deloitte, and it was never audited by Deloitte's own admission. All they did was observe. They didn't observe everything, and they never certified the results.
I'm sorry, my friends, but the slogan, "We have to beat Trudeau," is not enough to restore the credibility of the CPC. But that being said, you do not see the Conservative Party of Canada lending credibility to the immature, out-of-control actions of Antifa.
So,
Get the fuck away from me.
now what?
Get the fuck away from
This
me.
isn't a conversation, my friend. This isn't rational. You're acting
Fuck
like
you.
a grade schooler.
Fuck you.
Look how shaky
fuck
you are.
yourself.
You're being so emotional.
I don't
I want to
care.
give you a platform to talk
No,
about your
fuck
points
you.
of view.
Yeah, I don't need your fucking platform. I have the platform. This
Anger
is the
isn't the
platform.
answer.
Hey,
You're
hey,
supposed to be here
film this.
fighting hate.
Film this. Film it.
Yeah, well, it's a hate-filled mob,
Just film
and we
it.
are filming it.
I've talked to the OPP associate president out of Perth and gave him PTSD treatment programs for vets.
Film the crowd and intimidate your fucking viewers. Go and intimidate them. Because this is the crowd that's going to mobilize every time you try to...
You realize what you're doing is trading in fascism, right? This is how fascism works.
Oh my God.
No, you're doing violence.
You don't even...
You're
get it.
committing violence.
No. how is
And
this
hate.
violence?
You're yelling. We're not having a
I'm
conversation.
yelling at you.
Fascists
You're
shut
outrageous.
down people.
You're fucking outrageous.
You don't know who I am.
So far, our attempts at peaceful dialogue were not yielding the best results.
So what's your name, fella?
My name's Jared.
So what do you think of all of this today?
I just came down here to see what was going on. Can I swear?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I just came down here to see the shit.
Free
storm.
fucking speech.
Yeah, I came down here to see the shitstorm. Really. You know, I don't personally subscribe to Antifa or the Northern Guard. I consider myself, I guess, you know, like I'm fairly socially liberal, but you know, I don't agree with the right-wing protesters really, but I think they're fine to say whatever they want. What disappoints me is that there isn't really discourse on either side. The majority of people, I'm going to say, are not Nazis.
Correct.
I think that's pretty apparent. You know, there's no goose stepping, there's no swastikas. You know, some of their views might be ignorant, or I might think they're ignorant, or I might think they're wrong. But in the end, I think they're all just, you know, people. So I think it gets really dangerous when you start labeling all of them as Nazis. When you have the masked people who I've seen, you know, shoving and pushing and dumping water on people, you know, it doesn't really reflect well on their group at all. Which gives them the image of all being radical leftists and...
It has, in my opinion, it has more in common with fascism than it does stopping fascism.
Absolutely. I think part of living in a democracy, and which I love about Canada, is that, you know, I can speak freely about these issues and not have to worry about it. You see people in the Antifa rally with communist flags. And, you know, in my mind, and I think in the mind of a lot of people, that's just as bad as fascism.
It's even worse.
Millions of people died under communism.
Look, man, be safe out there, okay?
Encouraged by the finding of our first moderate, we made our way over to the main body of the counter-protest. Note that Cupid flag on the right-hand side of the screen. That is a Union flag. And you can see the police in the foreground in front of me walking. They were more concerned with Antifa violence than they were any other thing. They were not there to monitor the so-called fascists. They were there to protect the fascists from the violence of these people that I am now trying to engage with.
I'm looking for comment on the flag and what it represents to people.
We don't want to mess with 19.
No, I got a platform. It's yours if you want to advance your cause.
We don't want your platform. Sorry.
Okay. All right.
The recurring theme is that nobody that was actually with Antifa wanted to talk to us on camera. And at this stage of the game, they didn't really know who we were. And you would think that if there's a camera pointing at you and you have a cause and you have a point to make, you would make use of it. But as I stood here, sort of perplexed, I overheard the dark-haired woman in the middle of the screen and the older gentleman. They are Ukrainian immigrants, and they had a heck of a lot to say about the sins and horrors of communism.
This is an interesting conversation, and I just...
Actually, our daughter right now is in a trip in Asia, and she was reading 3 books. One book was actually about China and how live life people in China. This was written by Chinese who live there. Another book was about Red Khmers, about what they did. She's Canadian. She was born in Canada. We were born in the Soviet Union. Actually, we lived our life there until age 30. Then we moved to Canada. We know what communists could do. During Stalin times, my relatives were killed. Here is my actually cousin. Her father, she was born from her father who was sitting for 25 years in Gulag.
Yeah.
She's here. You know, when we see that flag, this for me symbol of biggest oppression was with given for him.
Ever.
You know,
Hundreds of millions of people died under that flag.
of people
Killed by people carrying the symbol.
They think that in Canada you can go with any flag and everything because this is a democratic country, because it's a country where opinion matters. If they would ever came with a foreign flag even now in Moscow, even with Ukrainian flag, they will go to the prison because that's a difference. And they just don't know what they're doing.
Maybe historically illiterate.
Yeah, they're historically illiterate. There is lots of problems with capitalism. There is lots of problems in the United States. There are lots of problems with in
Why
many,
being
many
angry, man?
countries.
I'm just here talking. Well, why don't you talk to me about what you believe about communism? Anger's not enough, my friend. We're here trying to have a conversation. Like, isn't that what this is about? Is fighting hate? Is this about fighting hate? That's hate. That's hate. Why is this guy promoting hate when you're supposed to be here? You guys are supposed to be here fighting hate. None of you will talk to me. You just scream at me because I'm wearing a suit. Like, what's with that? What's with that? I would love to. Like, what are you here for? I'd love to give you. Who are you with? Just myself. I'm a blogger. That's it. Simple as that.
I'd like a little more information about it.
Now, if you're having a hard time hearing it, again, I'm sorry for the interference, but this guy's concern, who's wearing the face mask and who's wearing the sunglasses to conceal his identity, he doesn't want to talk to me because he doesn't know enough about me. I'm giving him my name, my website, and my face is not covered. I'm out in the open. But ignorance of your own blatant hypocrisy is the calling card of Antifa. You should have been there to look this guy in the eyes. He wanted to kill me, and you could see it in his face.
FrankVon.ca. I just blog about current events, and I'm just trying to get some information about what you're aiming for. That's what I'm after.
We want to end fascism.
Well, that's a noble goal. But I see communist flags, and I'm just curious.
That's not fascism.
But it's communism.
That's not fascism.
But hundreds of millions of people have died under that flag.
No, they didn't.
So 60 million people didn't die under Mao?
That's not the point here.
Okay. So what is the point?
What is your point? Why are you here?
I'm reporting. I'm just trying to get information.
You're just reporting.
I'm trying to get information on what you guys are doing.
You're not on our side.
So it's there's no conversation to be had.
There's no platform, no.
Okay. Fair enough. At least I know where you stand. I hope you have a good day. All right.
Who's hate-filled here? Who's bigoted? Who is the death of conversation? Who, in this case, are the fascists? So the interference was so bad on this clip that I'm just narrating it. There wasn't anything of an event that was happening. I was just trying to find somebody in this crowd as the protesters were moving towards the monument, trying to find somebody that would talk to me. This guy in the pink handkerchief here, he tells me that I'm too well dressed to be there. And I said to him, isn't that a little bit discriminatory? You know, you're discriminating against people who are dressed in suits. What's up with that? They just walked away because they really didn't have a sufficient answer. The guy told me to go fuck myself, something along those lines. And I just kept trying to talk to people. And I finally found somebody that didn't want to talk to me. Shocker. Look at all those communist flags everywhere.
Nazi trolls, fuck off. Do you want to talk about your sign and why you're out here today?
I'm here because racism is fucking stupid, and nobody should have a platform to spread that bullshit.
So who's spreading racism today? I'm just asking. If you want to say something, use my platform. Does anybody want to offer comment on the protest? All right, so what's your name, sir?
Hi, my name is Brandon Wallingford.
Brendan
Wallingford.
And what happened to you? What did you experience today?
Well, I came here to have a rally against some of the policies that Justin Trudeau is putting in place here in Parliament, and just show my support for the people who are trying to stop some of the problematic things that he's doing. You know, the attacks on small businesses, some of the improper handling of refugee crisis and immigration, some of the problematic choices that he's making that are hurting the way that Canada is operating and causing these divisions and this violence that's happening. And when I was on Parliament Hill here, waiting to help set up with the rally that was about to happen, I got jumped by literally a mob of Antifa. They imbue the same ideals as fascists do. They're highly controlling. They want everybody to think the way they do. They're not open to having conversations with individuals. I was tackled. I was body checked. They tried to pick my pockets and steal my keys from my car. And that's the truth of the things that happen here in these rallies, is that the radical left is ready to do and say things that are untrue and violent to hurt anybody that they don't like. If you've been labeled something that they don't like, they don't question it, they just jump you. And that's the awful thing.
They're not listening. It's the death of conversation.
Yeah, it's the death of conversation.
And nothing you've said to me here today nothing he said is unreasonable.
Well, I like to think so, and I want to be able to have conversations with the individuals who come in this giant mob.
This fellow's experience was not unique. I witnessed 3 assaults myself, and it was never any right-winger assaulting anybody else. It was always the left, it was always Antifa, it was always the communists that were doing the physical assaulting. Now, this next lady, she spoke to me, but on condition that I would block out her face, because not only was she afraid of reprisal, she was afraid of losing her job. So thick is the cloak of silence that the left has encapsulated any conservative conversation in, that these people have to fear the consequences of thought.
Right, so they were swarming one of the Proud Boy members. They were...
picking up.
Sorry.
No.
They were shoving him, swarming him, yelling at him, screaming, chanting shame, putting up blowhorns, things like that. And then they started taking a big flag and encircling him, trying to block us off from reaching him. That way they could be violent towards us and we wouldn't be able to capture it. So I finally snuck in there, and I just put my hand on one of these women with a little bandana covering her face. And she said, "You're a Nazi." And I said, "No, I'm not. That's ridiculous." And she said, "No, you're a Nazi. You're obviously a Nazi." And she started pushing me. She's like, "Don't touch me, Nazi." She started freaking at me. And I said, "No, he has a right to be here. We all have the right to free speech. This isn't supposed to be a violent protest." And because they were trying to bully him to get him to leave Parliament. So she had another altercation with me. She kept coming up and confronting me. And she shoved me again. I said, "Stop touching me." And I pulled out my phone. And she swatted at my hand. So then I went and pulled down her bandana. I said, "Show your face if you're proud of what you're doing." I pulled her bandana down. She started screaming that I punched her in the face, which is absolutely not what happened. Then she came at me, spat in my eye, shoved me, and then started giving me death threats. She's like, "I'm going to kill you. I'm going to fucking kill you." And then I just walked away from her, and then she was going around threatening other people. No people on that side will talk whatsoever. The one person who would talk with me, agreed that we shouldn't put things underground, like Nazism, sex work, stuff like that. But he was basically saying that if people say they don't agree with this, or they condemn it, or they want to make social policies, that means other people could be violent to other groups. And this is why we should make all forms of hate speech illegal, which in essence is you can't criticize things, because if you criticize things, people will get angry and be violent to others, which is completely untrue. They have absolutely no logic.
It's punishing the victim and rewarding the assaulter.
Pretty much, yeah. And the police, unfortunately, too, and I understand their position, right? If they do anything towards these people, they'll automatically be made out to be fascist regime police. So they have to be careful. You can tell they're very afraid and nervous. They are pretty friendly with us, but very diplomatically, right? They're trying to be as neutral as possible. The media won't cover our side at all. If we complain about the other side, they won't cover it. They'll have cameramen here and they'll film, but they'll try, obviously, to just make it look bad and look at the group. But they will not film any of our complaints about the violence on the other side, our inability to talk with them, or any of the good talking points about why we're here. And I was really disappointed today coming here.
Here, yeah.
Take it easy, be safe, okay?
So my take on this is I've been trying to talk to these people and get sort of what they're all about. Nobody will talk to me, and I feel like I'm going to get killed if I keep standing around in there, but I did for a while. There's a coalition over there. They're called the Canadian Coalition of Concerned Citizens. I've gone to their Facebook page, and I can't figure out what they're doing that's racist. Maybe you could help me.
They're moderates, aren't they? They're just Canadians. They believe in Canadian laws. And
Canadian laws, they have some criticisms of different things. I was actually supposed to say
immigration laws to be followed.
Enforce laws.
Yeah, that are already on the books.
And apparently that's fascism.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
that's not so good.
Yeah. I find it fascinating. I come and check it out. I see no Nazis and no fascists, either in colors or flags. But I do see the communist flags, and I do see like the other side of that. I mean, I think a lot of it is fascism at the end. On that side, anyway.
Yep. Remember Churchill?
And all that stuff.
Churchill said the next fascist would be called anti-fascist.
Yeah, and so here we are.
Now, the media, of course, is never going to tell you the truth of this situation. If you head on over to CBC, you read far-right anti-fascist protesters temporarily shut Quebec border crossing, but you don't really see coverage of the violence that the left caused. You can say what you want about Storm Alliance, and you can say what you want about the Canadian Coalition of Concerned Citizens, and you can say what you want about Northern Guard. You can agree or you can disagree with their views, but the facts still remain. Only one side is exercising repression. Only one side is exercising violence, and only one side is lost to complete unreasonable irrationality. Antifa is cancer, and our media has to stop apologizing for it. The Justin Trudeaus of the world and the Bernie Sanders and all these other virtue-signaling politicians, they need to call this what it is. And I heard many people on both sides complaining about Donald Trump, but you know what? Donald Trump is one of the only politicians who's called out Antifa for exactly what it is. I spent 2.5 hours on the Hill today. I saw love and I saw hate. That virtue and that vice were on the complete opposite side that the liberal media would have you believe. And I'm going to leave off this video with my visit to the National War Memorial, as well as comments from a true Canadian hero, a veteran who travels around the country, sleeps in the streets, trying to find veterans who have fallen through the cracks and get them the help they need. No visit to Ottawa would be complete without a visit to Canada's War Memorial. And I would say that it's easy for everyone out there. The easy thing to do is to reject police and to reject armies and to reject the military, reject the Navy, reject war. It's so easy to virtue signal about rejecting warfare, but it's a lot harder to stand up and fight and go and do the difficult things. And if it wasn't for the men and women who laid down their lives in a lot of these exchanges, the world in which we live wouldn't be standing here today. The Canada that we know would not be as it is today. So we owe much today on the foundation that these people laid. And unfortunately, yet again, interference ruined the premier interview that I would have loved to have shared with you. This man's name is Trevor. What he carries there are the clothes and everything he needs to get across the country. He walks from city to city, trying to save first responders and people, veterans from the armed services who are suffering from PTSD, to try and get their help. He goes to the hostels and he seeks them out because he knows that they're falling through the cracks. He showed me his medals that he's received from the Ministry of Defense. He showed me selfies that he has with the Minister of Defense and people all around the country. And his intent, his eye contact was perfect. His intent was pristine, and I can't give you a contact number for this man. I can't give you his website. I can't tell you how to get a hold of him. He doesn't have Facebook. He essentially is just doing this for no attention, just the goodness of his heart. And I found his story to be particularly moving. And for those of you who have made it this far, you get to hear some poorly recorded music from a time gone by. sole priority. Hill the hop, trying to restart. Stumble down and again I fall apart. Damaged goods, I truly am. Clearly seen, I am truly damned. Looking out, I see no relief. Deep inside, beside my heart, still there lies the holy spark. Season now, drawn deep. Remember how creation speaks. Where did all this time go? How could I be so slow? Define who I truly am, seeming to not give a damn. One can never walk away when you've heard the wise one say, get on your destined path, live your life with no regrets. As the change slowly comes, new day in the setting sun, let go of all you've been, release the truth found deep within. This little song is for a little 3-year-old lady named Brooklyn, who is now apparently my biggest fan. So I think she needs some new material to play all her various instruments to. It's a very simple one. In my life, I've carried many loads of roots within many checkered roles. Some were black as a heavy night, but the journey always led to a light. A table on ground where we would sit playing chess while drinking beer and gin. For the moment I could set my burdens down and find the answers in the hours as they passed. Richardson's we would go, those nights pass so fast they snow. We face the dawn from within each dark. Oh, how those talks eased a load so stark. That was ever there for me too, whether I was angry or just singing the blues. In my corner, no matter the crime, can't count the nights he kept me keeping time. danced around what we could really feel. Those times helped us to grow and heal. A moonlit truck and thieves roamed the night. We cut the chains and picked all our fights. You walked with me down a winding road. Into you I have pledged upon my soul. To be no for the song, but singing in the trees. It's about the loads we don't dare put down, the weights to which we are ever bound. There is no rest for what could and should be. Some paths are walked alone when with me. You wanted the debates and you wanted the documentary, and you got more than you bargained for. I'm Frank Vaughn. If you like the work, please consider supporting it. I can't believe how long this video took, considering I was using footage I've already compiled, but here it is. Hopefully it's out on time. Might be a little late today. I'll see you in the next one. Did you know that I have a website? frankvaughn.ca, the ultimate repository for all of my work, and a backup location just in case the censors come for me again. And if you like the content, please consider using the donate link in one of the options available. There are no paywalls, there is no advertising, and there is no Patreon, and I intend to keep it that way. Thank you for your time and your consideration.